morning. This meeting of the Maryland Public Service Commission will come to order. Before we start the business component of today's meeting, I'd like to recognize the imminent departure of one of our members of our management team, Pam Janung. Pam, we hardly knew you. Pam started last November as the assistant director in the technical division. She came to us from Phoenix after long service to the Arizona Corporation Commission. And the pull of a new grandson will be bringing her back to Phoenix, so we can't hold that against Pam. But Pam, thank you for your service over the past year, helping out Tony Myers and the rest of the management team in the technical division. We know that your talent and expertise will be sorely missed. So, thank you. With that, turning to, we have minutes from the October 9th, 2019 meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are approved. Mr. Secretary,
Mr.
the
Chairman,
consent agenda.
we have 5 items on the consent agenda this morning. Item 1, PEG Bandwidth Maryland LLC filed a request for approval to participate in new financing of up to an aggregate amount of $325 million. Item 2, New Horizons Communications Corp. filed a request to withdraw its tariffs pursuant to order number 88353. Item 3 is, and item 4 are applications for, item 3 is Walnut Ridge Wind LLC filed an application for the Walnut Ridge Wind Farm as a Tier 1 renewable energy facility. Item 4 is Finance Guru LLC filed an application for a license to supply electricity or electric generation services in Maryland. And finally, item 5 is a filing from United Energy Trading LLC, also filed an application for a license to supply natural gas or natural gas supply services in Maryland.
Thank you. Do the commissioners have any questions on these 5 consent items? Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question on item number 3, if there's anybody who is prepared to answer. Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, Commissioner. Michael Jang on behalf of staff.
Mr. Jang, how big is this facility?
This facility is 212 megawatts.
Pretty big.
Yes.
And where is it located?
This is in Illinois.
In Illinois. It's pretty far away. And how much money does the renewable energy credits roughly represent?
The 212 megawatts would roughly represent $2.95 million.
Almost $3 million, and that's going to go out of our state's economy, create jobs and other things in Illinois' economy.
Yeah.
About 80% of our recs do that, right? Roughly?
Roughly.
Approximately. Okay. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Are there motions for these 5 items?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. For item number 1, I move that we note the financing for PEG Bandwidth Maryland LLC. For item number 2, I move that we permit the company to detariff with an effective date of October 16th, 2019. For item number 3, I move that we approve the application and issue a Renewable Energy Facility ID certification number, direct the applicant to establish a REC account with PJM GATS within 30 days of certification, and direct the applicant to file notice with the Commission within 30 days of any changes to the information in the application. For item number 4, I move that we grant the company a license to operate as an electricity supplier in Maryland, limited to broker services, for all customer classes and service territories applied for and recommended by staff, and direct the company to file notice with the Commission within 30 days of any changes to the information in the application. And finally, for item number 5, I move that we grant the company a license to operate as a natural gas supplier in Maryland for the customer classes and service territories applied for and recommended by staff. Direct the company to provide marketing and training materials specific to its Maryland operations to the Commission staff and Office of People's Counsel 30 days prior to utilization of the materials in Maryland, and direct the company to file notice with the Commission within 30 days of any changes to the information in the application.
Thank you, Commissioner Linton. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motions are approved. Mr. Secretary, the final item for the day.
Mr. Chairman, item 6 is Chop Tank Electric Cooperative, Inc. filed a request for waiver of certain requirements of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission under the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act of 1978.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Lloyd Spivak for the Commission staff. This is a filing by Chop Tank Electric Cooperative and Old Dominion Electric Cooperative seeking the Commission's endorsement of their request for waiver of FERC PURPA requirements. The request refers to a petition that would be made before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, for which the PURPA statute requires the participation of state regulatory authorities. If approved by FERC, the effect of the FERC petition would be to enable ODEC to make avoided cost payments for PURPA qualifying facilities in Choptank's place at ODEC's avoided cost. PURPA requires electric companies to enter into power purchase contracts with qualifying facilities which are non-utility owned generation facilities meeting certain operational standards. The PURPA Act requires an electric company to purchase the qualified facility's power at its avoided cost, which was intended to be a calculation of the cost to the utility of generating or purchasing electricity from another source. 18 Code of Federal Regulations, Section 292.402, allows the type of waiver request the cooperatives are making here after public notice in the area served by the electric utility. Specifically, for retail cooperatives such as Choptank, who receive all of their electricity through a full requirements contract with a wholesale power cooperative such as ODEC, FERC will allow the wholesale cooperative to be the entity paying qualified facilities at the wholesale cooperative's avoided cost. However, in states where the retail cooperative is regulated by a state commission, the request must come from the state's regulatory body, which would normally establish the retail cooperative's avoided cost. Choptank is one of 11 member cooperatives of ODEC, 9 of which are in Virginia and 1 in Delaware. On behalf of its Virginia members, ODEC filed a similar request last April before the Virginia State Corporation Commission. The Virginia State Commission established a notice and comment period, required the cooperatives to publish the notice, and subsequently issued an order granting their motion. The Virginia Commission order for notice and comment is attached to staff's comments as Appendix A. After reviewing the filing, staff believes the procedure used by the Virginia Commission was appropriate. Staff therefore recommends that the Commission require the cooperatives to issue a public notice in Choptank's service territory, giving the public 21 days to comment on the proposal and allowing the cooperatives 7 days to respond. The Commission should further direct staff to report on any comments received.
Thank you, Mr. Spivak. Before turning to the utility, does Office of People's Counsel wish to make any comments?
Thank you, Your Honor. William Fields for the Office of People's Counsel. We filed a brief letter. We support the staff's recommendations and don't really have any additional comments beyond that.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
Thank
Field.
you.
Counsel for the cooperative.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Can you hear me okay? Good morning. My name is Adrienne Clare, and I'm counsel for Old Dominion Electric Cooperative. Counsel for Choptank is also here. Old Dominion and Choptank agree with everything that staff has said. We've reviewed staff's report as well as the Office of People's Counsel letter. The one place where we respectfully disagree with staff's recommendation is on the 21-day comment period. From our perspective, it's unnecessary and redundant with what we'll have to do before going to FERC. Under the FERC regulations, it's 292.402 of the FERC regulations, of the Code of Federal Regulations. Old Dominion, before going in for the FERC waiver, has to publish notice in the areas served by Old Dominion, which will mean Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware. That has not yet happened. Old Dominion will publish that notice in newspapers throughout the service territory before submitting the FERC application. After the application is submitted to FERC, FERC publishes a notice in the Federal Register, and that has a 21-day comment period as well. So already in the FERC process, there's this exact requirement to have notice given throughout the service territory, and then there's an additional 21-day period through the Federal Register. For that reason, from our perspective, any further notice by this commission is redundant and unnecessary. I'm happy to answer, of course, any other questions you might have.
Ms. Clare, the cooperative has already received the sign-off from the Virginia Commission, is that correct?
That's correct, Your Honor.
And that was back in August?
That was in August, yes.
Okay. I recognize that the cooperative has only reached out to the Maryland Public Service Commission and made its filing back on September 17th, 2019. Is there a reason why Choptank filed with the Maryland Public Service Commission so much later than the Virginia Corporation Commission?
There is, Your Honor. Counsel for Choptank, of course, can fill in any of the blanks that I'm going to leave here, but there were conversations with the staff of the Maryland Commission prior to and around the time of the Virginia filing. This is unique for Choptank and ODAC before the Maryland Commission, so we frankly weren't sure exactly what form the filing with this commission should take. And so I know those conversations were initiated with the commission staff, at least at the time of the Virginia filing, I believe well prior to that. And so we went ahead with, we had conversations with both the Virginia Commission staff and this commission staff, got resolution with the Virginia Commission staff of exactly what filing we should make before the Virginia Commission, so submitted that. The conversations continued with your staff at the Maryland Commission, and so once those were resolved, we proceeded with the filing here. So no other reason for the sort of staggered filings other than we weren't exactly sure what to file and had those initiated conversations with the Maryland Commission staff.
Thank you, Ms. Claire. Mr. Spivak or Mr. Fields, would you like to respond? Ms. Claire has stated that pursuant to PURPA and FERC rules, there will be 2 additional opportunities to provide notice and comment.
Well, on that point, Commissioner, I do note that the process that was filed in Virginia had a period for people to comment there. And what's being requested here is your endorsement of their petition. So I think it would be helpful if your endorsement is informed by whatever public comment may be out there. They're asking for your action here, not the FERC's action. So there is that. I would note that, yes, there were a lot of discussions between staff and Choptank on the various filings associated with this, but most of those discussions were centered on the Choptank QF tariff filing, not specifically on this petition.
Ms. Claire, what is the rush for Choptank? Staff and People's Council are only asking for an additional 21 days of public notice. As Mr. Spivak said, it is a little different because you're asking for the Commission's imprimatur in this case, notwithstanding the fact that there will be additional opportunity for public notice and comment.
Sure, our urgency is a bit of an overstatement, but what we hoped to do, Old Dominion and Choptank hoped to do, is having received the Virginia Commission endorsement, we hope to submit the waiver petition to FERC in enough time that there's not such time between the Virginia approval or endorsement and the submission to FERC that FERC now questions whether or not Virginia needs to have some further process. And so it simply was, having had that Virginia Commission endorsement in hand, we thought the sooner we can get this into FERC, probably the better from FERC's perspective and of course ours.
I'd like to think FERC is that thoughtful, but probably not.
I know you have experience, so I won't comment.
Counsel for Choptank at a earlier meeting, maybe a few weeks ago, I believe stated that in the service territory there are only 4 small QFs. Is that still correct, Ms. Troutman?
Good morning, Tiffany Troutman, Manager of Finance and Regulatory Affairs for Choptank. We currently, I believe, only have 3 active QFs in our territory that we are currently paying, and those QFs are grandfathered in under the current payment method, and that will not change. This request that ODAC and Choptank are making is a go forward. Anybody who is currently paid by Choptank under a rate X will continue to be paid at the same amount that they are paid today. We are grandfathering in all rate X accounts, and this will not change their payment method or who is paying them.
Do you have any new QFs on the horizon, since these 3 would be grandfathered, that would be affected by this petition?
We have, I believe, 2 or 3 that we have received applications for, and they actually submitted applications quite a while ago, and I'm not sure that they're actually going to build, but at an admin that we had a few weeks ago to approve our new QF tariff and close our rate X tariff, the commission did order us that all the applicants that are in queue would fall under the rate X and would be paid at Choptank's avoided cost of power. So we've already been ordered by the commission that those applicants would still be grandfathered and wouldn't be affected by this current petition.
Oh, all right. Well, so nobody in the queue would be affected either.
No, they would not be.
And these are all Perpa QFs under the umbrella of small power production facilities?
They are.
Renewables, I'm assuming?
Solar, and I believe some are solar and some are solar with batteries.
Thank you, Ms. Troutman. Do commissioners have questions? Commissioner Richard?
Yeah, just for staff, I'd be interested to understand, is there a prescriptive requirement, as you understand it, from the federal side that tells the states what we have to do to provide notice and receive public comment?
The requirement, such as it is, as was mentioned, 18 CFR 92.402. And the language isn't entirely clear whether it refers solely to state comment before the states or comment before the FERC.
Right.
The language literally says, state regulatory authority and non-regulated electric utility waivers. Any state regulatory authority with respect to any electric utility over which it has rate-making authority or non-regulated electric utility may, after public notice in the area served by the electric utility, apply for a waiver from the application of any of the requirements of subpart C. Now that seems to me that that the commission can't make the application that FERC and that ODEC and Choptank are asking us to make until after the public notice and comment has occurred.
After the FERC process, or
Well,
I mean, how does that happen? I mean,
the language here actually seems to say it has to come before you can make the application.
for our endorsement.
Right. Before you can
And
provide.
is it prescriptive? It has to be this 21 7-day process, or is that just a process that Virginia decided to adopt, and you thought we should do it as a state as well?
In that instance, it's what Virginia did, and yes, we were simply following their example. Generally speaking, with a notice and comment period, you do want to give enough time to let people have a genuine chance to see whatever it is that's being noticed and respond to it.
Okay.
And 21 days is actually a pretty reasonable period for that.
Well, how about our AM process, the administrative meeting process? That's public notice is made of, we're going to be looking at these items. Everyone should have been aware who follows the commission that we were going to be taking up this request for an endorsement. If there's not a really prescriptive requirement from the federal side, why would this be rejected as the correct or a correct way for a state to get its public notice, provide its public notice?
It's unlikely unless somebody really felt they had cause to challenge the action, but it's possible certainly.
Does Virginia have like a administrative meeting process? I mean,
Well, the difference between the commission's administrative meeting and the notice and comment that's being asked for here is that they would have to publish a notice within their service territory, specifically in their service territory, and generally it would be in some forum such as a regional paper or the Cooperatives newsletter, which is what Virginia Commission ordered. That would give people in that service territory a specific opportunity to see it, whereas the commission's administrative meeting, the only real notice of items on that is what's on the commission's agendas. So it functionally it differs, but
but it can be seen in
it
all
could
the
be
service
seen that way,
territories.
yes.
Okay. I think that's all the information I need.
If I
Commissioner-
may, is it okay
Yes,
if I respond
please.
just briefly to Commissioner Richards' question? In any event, we will Old Dominion and Choptank will publish in statewide newspapers. So regardless whether the Maryland Commission requires this additional notice and comment period, Old Dominion prior to going to FERC, so not after that filing is made with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, but prior to going to FERC, included in the waiver application to FERC is a publication of notice, proof that notice has been published in the statewide newspapers for Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware. Just wanted to be sure I was clear on that. And then after that is a 21-day comment period established by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission.
Okay. Yeah. No. I think your argument that this could be duplicative is a strong one. So thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
I have a couple questions, Mr. Chairman, each for ODEC and for staff, so I'll start with ODEC. Are the member cooperatives of ODEC in Virginia and the Commonwealth rate regulated by the State Corporation Commission?
They are, Your Honor.
They're all rate regulated?
Yes.
All 9 of them?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I thought I was led to believe they were not. Very good. I want to clarify the question that the chairman asked you with regard to time impact, notwithstanding your desire to expedite your filing at FERC. Is there any impact of time at all on this 21-day, what I view as a transparency period?
I'm not sure I understand your question, but
Is
beyond.
there any time impact if we grant the staff's request?
It just creates an additional time period before,
Yeah, I'm asking for a deleterious or negative impact to the companies.
no, beyond sort of not getting this taken care of.
Yeah, I said notwithstanding your desire to expedite moving forward, I want to make sure that there is no impact.
Not that I can identify beyond the timing of this all.
Because I usually am inclined to default to extra transparency, even if it may be a little additional, as long as there's no cost that I can ascertain. I'm not seeing any costs associated with
There,
this.
excuse me, I didn't mean to speak over you. Were you
Go ahead.
finished? Thank you. There may be some cost for Old Dominion filing if we pursue sort of filing the petitions separately. There's a fee to file petitions for a declaratory order with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, but that's not
Yeah,
beyond
that's
that.
not dependent on the action we take with regard to this recommendation, right?
It may be.
Why?
Simply because
Explain.
Old Dominion may decide, so if this commission decides that it wants to have this notice and comment period as requested by staff, it may be best for Old Dominion to try to pursue the filing with respect to Virginia members only, so that we don't have this concern over whether or not FERC, if we
Yeah.
wait, is going to have concerns over the timing.
Maybe that's a management decision I suppose you'll have to make, but I'm deciding for the citizens of Maryland in my decision, not
Certainly, Your
not
Honor. I was just trying to answer the question.
Okay, very good, thank you. Staff, Mr. Spivak, is there any precedential impact or potential precedential impact on any other cooperative in the state of Maryland or any muni of this waiver?
Conceivably on SMECO. I mean, they could conceivably make the same request, but beyond that, I don't think there's anybody who would ask. And they're the only other major cooperative in the state. There are the two very small ones, but both of them are really regulated by other states. The commission largely defers to because they're much larger in the adjoining states. So one of them, in fact, is actually covered by this one, that being A&N, which is regulated mostly in Virginia, and the other is the Somerset Cooperative out in western Maryland, and they're regulated mostly by Pennsylvania. That's where the vast body of their customers are. So I don't think there's any precedential value other than for SMECO, really.
Okay.
Mr. Baker has also reminded me that SMECO purchases power in a very different way than ODEC does.
I thought this was a transaction between two cooperatives.
Right, and so in fact, it actually wouldn't apply to them either.
Okay, very good, thank you. So with regard to your recommendation, staff's recommendation, if approved, would you envision we would bring this item back before a future AM to take action?
I don't think it would need to come back before the administrative meeting. One part of the recommendation was for staff to do a report to the commission, and the commission could simply act on that report. I don't think it would require necessarily coming back before an administrative meeting unless there was some action other than actually going further to endorse, other than simply endorsing the petition.
That's a little curveball, because if we do get comments, we may want to have them before us at an AM, right?
Right. Well, that's the other side of that coin. If you honestly, it's unlikely that the commission will get a lot of comments on this, maybe none. And if the commission doesn't get comments, then you probably don't need to bring it back here. But if it does, you would probably want to take public action, and that would require you to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner London.
I think Ms. Troutman had something to add
Oh.
to that last.
Thank you. I just want to clarify that our current our current QF tariff is paying the QFs at ODAC's avoided cost of power. That the only change with the approval of this FERC petition is who is actually making the payment, but the value is not changing. So I would think that the only comment that would be made is possibly a concern with who's making the payment, who's cutting the check, but the dollar value is still the same no matter if this FERC petition is approved or not approved.
Thank you. Oh, okay. Commissioner Herman.
Ms. Claire. So under 292.402, it says that any state regulatory authority or non-regulated electric utility may make this filing. So is ODEC the non-regulated electric utility in this case?
Commissioner, the interpretation of the regulations is the non-regulated electric utility would be, for example, Old Dominion's member, Delaware Electric Cooperative, which is not subject to state regulation. So the way the regulations have been interpreted and implemented by FERC is that if you are an electric utility regulated by a state utility, you need the state utility to submit the filing or grant the authority to pursue the filing with FERC. If not regulated by a state utility, then you're a non-regulated electric utility and can pursue the filing on your own.
Okay, so this is my question here because, and I saw that this has been done. I read some of those other FERC orders and that sort of thing, but I'm trying to figure out, have other groups of cooperatives within the same, with using the same structure, have they done this where, who's going to make the application at FERC? The Delaware?
Old Dominion will.
Old Dominion.
Old Dominion will submit the application, and there was a draft of the application included.
I saw that.
I realized there was
That's
a lot
what I
of
thought.
documents.
I saw that. So Old Dominion. So is Old Dominion the non-regulated electric utility?
No. Old Dominion is regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. In the provision of the regulations that you're reading, that 402, the electric utility is the one with the purchasing obligation who would be going to FERC, meaning at the state level.
Meaning the chop tank.
Chop tank. in
Okay, so how does that work? Has this been done before? Because I'm having a hard time with trying to figure out who's making the application, just from a legal standpoint. Has this been done before, or are you going to end up in some sort of, jurisdictional struggle at the FERC once this is made?
It has been done several times, Your Honor. One of the appendices to the application that we submitted here was a stack of cases.
I
where it
saw
had been
those,
done.
yeah.
So if I can explain it, what would happen is the Generation and Transmission Electric Cooperative, which is Old Dominion, makes the filing to FERC for itself and on behalf of the members to pursue the waiver of their purchase obligation and sales obligation under the Public Utility.
So they're just kind of,
They go in, Old Dominion will submit
Fudging
the
it a
filing
little.
for itself and on behalf of the members. That's
okay, all right. I was just kind of confused by that because I just kept trying to figure out who was making this application, since clearly we're not. Therefore, sorry. So Mr. Spivak, therefore, let me ask you this question. Therefore, why is it, if we're not making the application, why is it our public notice and not theirs?
Well, you're not making the application, although I was under the impression that it would actually have a signature line for the Commission's General Counsel. I'm not sure if that's correct based on what I just heard.
I hadn't read that. We'll ask Ms. Claire that. I just thought they were being allowed to make a statement in there.
But the petition can't happen before FERC until it has, as they requested, your endorsement, which is basically is giving them the ability to say that the Maryland Commission has approved submitting this application to FERC. And that's what we're saying, that public notice should happen before you give that endorsement.
Well, where does it say that, Mr. Spivak, in the rules, that they have to wait until they get an endorsement? Is that just sort of has that been a practice, or
If
Ms.
I
Claire?
may, yeah, I actually agree with Mr. Spivak on this point. The state commission, because you regulate electric utilities before you regulate Chop Tank, the same way the Virginia Commission regulates those has the authority to go into FERC on behalf of the electric utilities which you regulate. So
Right.
the Maryland Commission could submit this waiver petition on behalf of Choptank, Virginia for the Virginia members, and then we would submit on behalf of Delaware because it's not regulated by a state commission. What Old Dominion is doing, instead of asking each state that regulates some of its members to go in, is instead submit one application with the state's endorsement. And this has been done in other proceedings. So there has been, I think it was one in Minnesota that's in the appendix that we submitted. The state commission actually signed, put their communications representatives on there and signed the application. In others, states have said they grant the endorsement. So what we have for Virginia is an order granting an endorsement, which we would then file with the petition
Okay.
to FERC and say we've got. So that takes the place of the state actually submitting the filing to FERC.
Okay.
I hope that cleared it up.
It does. So therefore, why then, if you're doing this in lieu of us doing it, then why shouldn't we issue the public notice?
Because we're going to issue a public notice. We have to do that anyway.
But isn't this our public notice to say, does anybody pursuant in the state of Maryland, the Public Service Commission is going, let's say we were making the waiver hypothetically, if you're doing it in place of us. So if you're doing it in place of us, isn't it then our obligation to sort of get comments and see what people have to say before we make that waiver? Isn't that the whole purpose of that notice? And therefore, why wouldn't we have that requirement to do the notice?
Our notice to potentially affected entities throughout the state of Maryland will give you'll see any comments that happen because we have to issue a notice throughout the state. So what would happen, I think, under staff's recommendation is a notice would be published in the newspaper. This commission would see whatever comments are filed. There may be additional process. If we didn't do that, if this commission didn't pursue staff's recommendation, Old Dominion and Choptank would issue a notice in the newspaper in Maryland, and comments would be submitted on that same filing. It's the same notice. And so after those comments are gathered, we of course would share them with this commission, but it literally would be doing the same thing all over again.
So can you use the notice, if we followed staff's proposal, and could you use that notice as your notice prior to the FERC application?
We would ask to do that, yes. Your Honor.
Yeah, you would. So therefore, because what I'm struggling with is that in theory, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but in theory, somebody could come in and say, hey, Maryland Commission, this waiver shouldn't be granted because of XYZ. I don't know that anybody's going to come in and do that. This sounds like something that FERC has done before and all of that. But isn't that really the whole purpose? So that if ODEC is doing this kind of in place of the Maryland Commission, shouldn't we make sure that there isn't a reason why we shouldn't be doing that? Isn't that the whole purpose of the notice?
It is, Your Honor, which is why we said our notices will take care of that. We will issue a notice and comments will be
Yeah,
submitted.
but you're asking us to endorse it before we see what the comments are, aren't you?
No, because you'll be able to see all of our comments. Well, we are, but you would see whatever notice is issued. If there are comments, then they would be, every potentially affected QF would see them, and your honors could see them as well.
Right, and then we'd have to somehow, if hypothetically, I'm not saying that there is an issue, but if hypothetically there were an issue, we'd have to rescind our endorsement?
There could be, well, we wouldn't be able to go, Old Dominion wouldn't be able to go forward at that point because we would have comments against the application itself. So if we don't have, if we have comments expressing disagreement with the application, we would have to resolve those before we go forward to FERC. And
Yes, but you would have to resolve those, not this commission.
that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
So, based on that exchange, let's assume that we just bypass this 21-day recommendation and endorse, and then you do the FERC notification as you just described. Where would any resultant comments be directed to?
Old Dominion would receive any comments, Old Dominion and Choptank would receive any comments that were submitted on the application. What the filing entities what we typically do when we are making these filings, if there are any comments, you resolve those or address them before going to FERC.
Yeah.
And in the FERC application, you represent that you've addressed any comments that may be submitted.
I see. I don't think we're gonna get any comments on this, to be honest with you. Maybe we will, maybe we won't, but in terms of process, I just think it's appropriate to allow that opportunity for this commission to directly receive any comments that may or may not be out there. Just, if we're gonna basically take ourselves out with an endorsement if we endorse today, so that's, I'm kind of signaling where I'm gonna vote on this item, so.
Understood.
Thank you. This is a matter where we haven't really discussed the substance, but this is form over substance. I think Ms. Trotman very well summarized what this case is about. It's about who's cutting the check to the suppliers here. I thought both counsel for ODEC and Chop Tank did a very nice job in preparing their transmittal letter, along with the draft FERC filing and the other references. And based on what I've seen, you're close to having my endorsement here. But it is unclear what our notice requirements are. Virginia erred on the side of caution, issued a 21-day notice period. And from what I'm hearing from both ODEC and Chop Tank, the strongest argument is just a temporal one. The fact that the Virginia Commission granted its decision to endorse back in August, and you don't want to wait too much longer before the commission moves forward. This commission moves forward on either granting an endorsement or not. Like Commissioner O'Donnell, I would be surprised if we see any adverse comments filed in response to a notice period that we would announce here. Obviously, if there are, we would have another hearing to discuss. If there are not, I think we could dispense with a administrative meeting. I don't like extra bureaucracy where it's not needed or extra hoops for the utilities to jump through. But in exchange with Commissioner Herman, I believe, Ms. Claire, you said, if the commission goes forward with this additional notice period, that would be the notice period that you would likewise substitute for the one that you were going to have anyway.
We would seek to do that, Chairman.
And I see no objection for this, why this commission would stop you from doing that. So you would consolidate this 21-day period, if the commission so grants, with the other notice period that you were going to announce in the state of Maryland. And then FERC does its own thing with its 21-day notice period pursuant to the PURPA and the Federal Power Act. For that reason, I do support staff's recommendation today. Do commissioners have wish to make additional statements on this? Commissioner Linton?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually had a question for People's Counsel, but they were supportive of the staff motion. But in their comments, they didn't note any interest in responding to comments. And I don't know if that was something that you were interested in doing, or just would you prefer to allow comments to come in and then take it from there?
Well, I think if the commission grants a notice period and there was comments, we could review the comments and make any, further statements as necessary. But we didn't, as you said, we didn't put in our letter any specific, or we didn't see any need for any specific process where we would review them and comment on them. But we certainly could if we saw, if comments did come in that warranted some response from us.
Okay. All right, thank you. I was also supportive of the staff's recommendation.
Thank you. Any additional comments from the bench? Commissioner Richard?
Yeah, I'm not supportive. I think this, in fact, is an extra hoop and somewhat bureaucratic. I mean, there is a full 21-day process, or 28-day process that is going to have to be executed in any circumstance. At this point, I don't see anything we're going to learn independently of that process. And so I certainly hope that the company will get that, will be granted by FERC to only have to do this once, because, again, I just find that, this is not going to impact any current QF. It's not going to impact any QF that's in the queue. It, given in PJM, you've already have the avoided cost largely set by the locational marginal pricing. So there's not going to really be any disincentive for, imposed by this for future QFs. So, again, I certainly hope, based on what I'm hearing today, that you're not required to go through this 28-day process twice because of the action of this commission.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Herman, do you have a statement?
No.
Okay.
No motion.
Is there a motion?
Yes, there is. Mr. Commission, I move that the Commission direct the cooperatives to issue a public notice in Chop Tank service territory, giving the public 21 days to comment on the proposal, and allowing the cooperative 7 days to respond, and direct the staff to report on any comments received.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Abstain.
Abstain. 4 commissioners in support, 1 abstained. Thank you. Seeing no additional business before the commission this morning, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Commissioners.